Welcome to NMH at 1, your lunchtime news and current affairs program. It's a fresh new week and we'll be glad to take you through the latest happenings across Namibia and beyond. My name is Glenn Rashipura and I'll be keeping you company for today's broadcast. Now, in the news today, Voice for Choices and Rights Coalition are inviting the public to join the Yes for Choice March taking place later this month. Now, if legal steps taken by Trustco Group Holdings don't succeed, the JSE will suspend the listing of its shares on 11 March 2022. Now, Russia announced new humanitarian corridors on Monday to transport Ukrainians trapped under its bombardment to Russia. Now, these and other stories lined up in today's broadcast. In our latest news, a robbery with aggravating circumstances was reported at around 3:30 a.m. in Ludwigsdorf. It is reported that 3 suspects armed with pistols removed 2 precast from the boundary wall to gain entry to the premise. Now, the intruders held 4 Chinese nationals at gunpoint and took property including 2 iPhones, a Huawei cell phone, clothes, and money in Chinese and US currency. Now, the suspects proceeded to break into the main house where they removed 2 televisions and 2 laptops. The total value of the stolen items is estimated to 73,299 Namibian dollars. Now, when we come back, we'll take a look at news from across the regions. Do stay with us. Welcome back to NMH at 1. Now let's get into today's visual news from across the regions. Now, the Voice for Choices and Rights Coalition are inviting the public to join the Yes for Choice March on 19 March. Here, the VCR's Ndikola Kelwa Natangwe explains how this march will help promote the legalization of abortion fight in Namibia. This clip was compiled by Yana Marie Smith. Let's have a look.
Justice now! Reproductive justice now! Reproductive justice now!
500 women die yearly in Namibia as a result of backdoor, unsafe, illegal abortions. So the Yes to Choice March is taking place on the 19th of March 2022 at 9 o'clock. We are starting at the Katutura State Hospital all the way to UN Plaza. I think the purpose of this is really that there is no other better moment, an urgent moment than now, when we are expecting for Parliament to submit a report after they had conducted and convened on the abortion public hearings. And I suppose that this is also one of our other advocacy avenues that we are using to revive once again constituencies, to inform people that, you know, the law still needs to be repealed. And as the pro-choice movement, we are still very much continuing with that advocacy. We will have a full-on program of speakers from various movements and organizations in which they will talk about reflections from the past 2 years, but also linking in 32 years into independence. As we do know, after that weekend, we are celebrating Namibia's 32 years of independence. So it's really dovetailing and linking women's independence versus our own country's independence, and how so many people still very much would be left behind just because of archaic laws, obsolete laws that continue to to affect and infringe on their reproductive rights and agency otherwise.
How far would you say we've come over the past year in terms of the, at times, very heated still debate on reproductive justice?
I think we've come quite far since especially the petition was launched in 2020 to reform the abortion law, which by that time had received 60,000 signatures, and right now we are still looking close to 70,000 signatures. And I suppose that really bringing more light to why the specific law is so draconian and the way that it already is archaic is that so many people have started understanding why the law must be repealed. And I suppose it's also through some of the influences from various pro-choice movements and organizations and individuals that have also gone to the public hearings that have been conducted in the different regions across the country to really speak for the abortion law to be repealed. And definitely that there have been also intersectional groups, LGBTQ plus groups that have also gone and had a very strong pro-choice pronouncement at these specific hearings. So we've come very far in finding ways to close specific information gaps, but there's still a long way to go because legislation, bill, all those many other steps must still be followed and must still be institutionalized to really fully and meaningfully realize the reproductive rights and healthcare of women and non-conforming people.
Does this law in any way protect women?
Not at all, because when the law was put together in the 1970s, this is an inherited apartheid archaic law. It was inherited from the then South African administration, which was under apartheid regime 47 years ago. It was actually meant to restrict the reproductive agency of especially white women, especially because it was what they wanted to see as a white utopian South Africa. And so they restricted the options of white women to preserve white legacy and not to preserve the lives of all women of color, of different race and ethnic groups. So coming back into Namibia, and especially as rightly as you point out, those that have more economic agency will be able to travel outside of Namibia to obtain this very vital essential service. And even to add that 500 women die yearly in Namibia as a result of backdoor, unsafe, illegal abortions. And so it very much forces women to procure abortions in very unsafe, unsanitary circumstances and conditions. And so it just exacerbates once again health conditions. It strains our health system, it strains our economy, and definitely also affects the socio-economic development of women and communities in very, very far severe ways. So you only have 4 conditions. One is if it's a threat to your life, it's a threat to your mental health, and if it was conceived through rape or incest, or if it's a serious risk to fetal impairment. Those are the only 4 conditions, and outside of that, it's criminalized. So you can go to jail of about 5 years or 5,000 fine or fees that you have to pay. The other is also when you're looking at the specific steps to obtain the law under these 4 conditions. The steps themselves are so cumbersome. It's almost that it refuels the narrative that this is definitely state-determined law and act for procreation, which imposes its own vision of a woman's role to procreate in society. And that already infringes on their reproductive agency and autonomy. And so by alleviating especially those cumbersome steps, then we know that women will have more choices, more options, and more agency, especially to obtain this very, very vital and essential health service.
Okay, now for anyone who wants to come join the protest in 2 weeks' time on the 19th of March.
So the Yes to Choice protest is inviting the public to join us at the Katutura State Hospital. We encourage everyone to wear green because this is also the color that's been used across the globe of various conservative nations that have also decriminalized in their countries, as we've seen recently with Colombia. And this is really just to signify that this is about reproductive justice, for the right for someone to parent, not to parent, and to make choices about their futures that affects their options. And so the greenness is really to signify growth, to signify options, and to signify those options and choices that they must have, that is their right and their prerogative.
When we return, we'll be taking a sneak peek inside Namibia's daily print publications. But first, a quick ad break to stay with us. Thank you for staying with NMH at 1. We now take a look at our local newspapers. Now, the Namibian Sun on its front page reports that despite the confirmation of Professor Mushinde Kashiwa's chieftaincy over the weekend, the Ovaherero Traditional Authority continues to be mirrored in controversies and disputes. Now, Kashiwa, according to attendees, was overwhelmingly endorsed as a paramount chief at Saturday's Senate meeting and wants to introduce a string of institutional reforms. Now, critics, however, claim that his overwhelming nomination was the result of a boycott by the faction led by OTA Chiefs Council Chairman Vipirwa Kapuo. Now, meanwhile, the Basic Education Ministry is grappling with a severe shortage of 4,479 classrooms, which would cost about 2.3 billion Namibian dollars to construct, Namibian Sun reports. However, the ministry's development budget stands at a meager 398 million Namibian dollars. Education Minister Anangi Bondoka had to explain in Parliament last week about the dilapidated state of schools and hostels around the country. Republican leads with the news of the safe arrival of 22 Namibian elephants that were sold and exported to the United Arab Emirates over the weekend. Now, the elephants were loaded into a Boeing of the Moldovan freight airline Fly Pro at the international airport Hosiako Tako on Friday, while foreign media journalists were hoping in vain to catch a glimpse of the loading process. Now, the Ministry of Environment, Forestry and Tourism had been criticized by various environmental institutions for the secrecy it has kept regarding the export of the elephants. Now, the ministry's spokesperson, Romeo Muyunda, said no domestic or foreign laws were contravened by either the exporting or importing countries. Now, Republican also reports on the dramatic cricket match in Dubai yesterday, in which Namibian Eagles captain Gerhard Erasmus scored a remarkable 1-1 unbeaten run against Oman to save his team from a desperate situation after they had lost their first 7 wickets for just 53 runs. Now, after reaching the unlikely total of 226 all out, the Namibian bowling attack then railed to bowl out Oman for just 116 runs to win the match by 110 runs. While Namibians joined the world in street protests against Russia's invasion of Ukraine, Namibia abstained twice last week when it came to criticizing Russia, both in the United Nations Human Rights Council as well as in the UN General Assembly, as Allgemeine Zeitung reports through the Deputy United States Secretary of State in the Office for the African Relations sees the abstention of many African states as cautious criticism, the U.S. diplomat Molifi told a group of African reporters. Now, each and every one of us, as individuals or as states, must examine the best option available to us and thereby try to influence Putin or Russia. Therefore, this is not just been one path that applies to everyone, and so everyone should do what he or she thinks is right. Now, Allgemeine Zeitung has the story of how Afritin, the tin mine in the Uis area, discovered the mineral spodumene within its prospecting area and intends to expand its offer by mining strategic metals. Now, the Chinese mining company Xingfeng Investment already has the mining permit and is busy with the construction of the infrastructure. Now, Afritin has set out the target to produce the target to production of 10,000 tons of tin concentrate and 35,000 tons of lithium concentrate, Afritin's managing director, Anthony Vildred, said in a press release. The discovery of spodumene, an important mineral for the manufacturing of lithium batteries, and was made during a reconnaissance of existing mining areas. Now, the Namibian quotes from the head of state's interview with the Al Jazeera News Network about the discovery of oil in the country. President Hage Geingob has challenged investors in the oil sector as well as the mining industry to create value chains locally for the Namibian economy to accrue the optimal gains from its resources. Now, Geingob said Namibia had discovered gold and diamonds before, but the country is still not fully benefiting from these discoveries, and therefore the groundwork must be done properly with regards to the oil in the long term. From the Windhoek High Court, the Namibian reports on the maximum sentence of life imprisonment handed out to 3 conspirators over a murder plot in which a woman killed her husband during March of 2015. A City of Windhoek employee, Peter Muleka, 36-year-old at the time, was brutally stoned to death after he had been lured to a secluded place in the Goriankap Dam area. Now, Muleka's wife, Anastasia Limbinda, 40, David Konjara, 40, and Donald Hinjo, 32 had all made confessions to magistrates shortly after their arrest in early April 2015. Now, according to today's lead story in New Era, the government is set to lose out on millions of dollars in revenue during this year's auction of fishing quotas, especially for horse mackerel. This follows a cabinet decision taken last week to reallocate an extra gratia governmental objective quota of horse mackerel to 12 companies, including in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Now, the successful bidders at last year's auction for horse mackerel could not catch their quota due to time constraints in organizing their logistics and legal compliance documents. Then in October, the DRC bought the remaining 27,000 metric tons that was not sold during the auction. Now, in New Era, the Ministry of Environment, Forestry and Tourism, Pohamba Shifeta, pointed out the benefits of the new Gaming and Entertainment Control Act that was implemented in December last year. Now, according to him, all the gambling houses must be registered, and the new law provides for fairness in the issuing of licenses to gambling house operators. Now, he added that there will be an electronic monitoring system as well as a gambling inspectors with powers to arrest people and to seize assets when procedures are not followed. Now, according to MarketWatch, Namibia's trade deficit deteriorated considerably during the 12 months leading up to January of this year, moving up from 3.2 billion Namibian dollars in January of 2021 to 4.1 billion a year later. Trade statistics supplied by the Namibia Statistic Agency points out that the deficit widened as a result of export earnings reducing by 24% over the relevant period. Now, that's it for today's newspaper review. When we come back, we'll take a look at what's currently happening in the market with some economic news. Do stay with us. Welcome back to NMH at 1. Now, in today's economic news, JSE bid will devastate Trustco. If legal steps taken by Trustco Group Holdings don't succeed, the JSE will suspend the listing of its shares on 11 March 2022. Should the JSE suspend the listing of Trustco Group Holdings shares on the South African Stock Exchange, the Namibian-based company will suffer incalculable damage, which will likely devastate Trustco entirely and irreparably. Now, following Trustco's the implementation of its decision until 1500 hours on 11 March 2022, if the group fails to obtain the appropriate relief, by then the JSE will immediately implement its suspension decision without further notice to Trustco. Now, in an update filed on the JSE and the Namibian Stock Exchange, the Trustco said it simultaneously Friday filed an application seeking that the JSE's suspension decision is in itself suspended. Now, the latest developments stem from an ongoing feud between the JSE and Trustco regarding the latter's financial statements for the year ending 31 March 2019, as well as its interim results for the 6th month ending 30 September 2019. Now, in our next story, oil traders are betting prices may pass $200 a barrel this month. Now, traders piled into options that oil could surge even further after rising to the highest since 2008. 2008, with some even placing low-cost bets that futures will rise above 200 before the end of March. Now, price to buy call options for higher crude prices surged as the market assessed the possibility of a supply cut off from Russia, one of the world's biggest exporters. At least 200 contracts for the option to buy Brent futures at $200 a barrel traded on Monday, according to the IC Futures Europe data. Now, the options expire March 28, 3 days before the contract settles. The price to buy them jumped 152% to 2.9 a barrel. Now, a 150 a barrel dollar call option for the June Brent contract doubled from Friday, according to the ICE, while the cost of 180 call options jumped to 110%. The front month May contract for Brent surged dramatically early on Monday as traders panicked over talks of a Russian crude ban amid Libyan supply disruptions and delays to expected progress in Iranian nuclear talks. Now, Russia is the world's third largest oil producer behind the US and Saudi Arabia. Now, in our next story, GIPF exposure in Russia at 568 million Namibian dollars. Now, the government's institution pension fund has said it has not made a decision on what to do with its investments in Russia yet. The involvement investment are worth around 568 million Namibian dollars. The investment total is at least 0.42% of the fund's 135 billion Namibian dollars in total investments as at 31 March 2021. And the fund has not named the companies it has invested in. It has also not declared whether it would detach itself from Russia, citing it will continue to monitor the situation. Now, Russian troops invaded Ukraine in what Russians said was going to be a special military operation. Now, this has triggered a series of events, including the imposition of sanctions on Russia, its leadership, and the country's billionaires. Now, several companies, such as oil major BP, Apple, Disney, and Ford, have announced they would be ditching operations in Russia. GIPF's Chief Executive Officer, David Nyoma, says the fund, due to the nature of its diversified investment, is always affected by global events. Now, Nyoma says war introduces volatility and seldom produces winners. On whether the GIPF was going to sell off its investments in Russia, Nyoma said the fund employs a set manager with proven expertise in assessing and making investments in specific markets and will take all the necessary mitigating actions necessary. Now, let's have a look at our economic indicators. The US dollar and the Chinese yuan have maintained their value, while the euro has increased in value. The British pound now trades at 20 Namibian dollars and 35 cents. Nothing for most of the closing prices as stock maintains their price. There is, however, an 18% increase for Leshaho Holdings Namibia, while Namibia Assets Management Ltd also increased its stock price. Local index closed at 0.36% higher on the stock exchange, while the overall index closed at a price of 4.43% lower. Now, commodities have gone up in value, with Brent crude oil observing a 6.89% increase. Zinc also observed a 3.33% increase in value. Gold increased by 0.87%. Now, the UN has repeatedly accused Malian soldiers of summarily executing civilians and suspected militants. We share more on the UN's finding as they investigate deaths in Mali. More on this when we return with news from across the continent. Do stay with us.
Have you received a loan from NSFAF? NSFAF loan is the same as any other loan. It must be paid and settled. NSFAF has a set of guidelines on how you can repay your loan and become debt-free. Therefore, it is important that you, a former beneficiary and a responsible Namibian, show your patriotism by helping pay back your loan and thus helping NSFAF become a revolving fund for the benefit of future potential students. By failing to pay back your NSFAF loan, you risk being blacklisted or having a court order against you. So arrange with the fund to pay back your loan today. For more information on how you can repay your loan, visit our website at www.nasfaf.na or visit our Facebook page or Twitter. Do the right thing and hashtag #PaybackTheMoney.
Now let's take a look at our continental news. Now, UN investigating dozens of deaths in central Mali. The United Nations peacekeeping mission in Mali said on Friday it was investigating allegations that dozens of people were massacred in the center of the country. Now, a video circulating on social media since Thursday shows dozens of badly burnt bodies with their eyes blindfolded and their hands bound together. Some of them appear to have holes in the back of their heads. Now, an official in central Mali said the video shows the bodies of 35 men that were found on Tuesday night in the rural commune of Disablé, an area where Islamist militants have been battling Malian soldiers. Now, the official said there were no eyewitnesses to the men's deaths, but that they are believed to be people who were arrested by the Malian army, some in February and others on March 1. The UN has repeatedly accused Malian soldiers of executing civilians and suspected militants over the course of their decade-long fight against groups linked to Al-Qaeda and Islamic State. Now, in our next story, South Africa risks destroying 100,000 vaccine doses by the end of March due to slow uptake. About 100,000 doses of Pfizer COVID-19 vaccinations are at risk of being destroyed by the end of this month due to slow uptake by citizens, South African health authorities said on Friday. Now, South Africa has recorded the most coronavirus infections and deaths on the African continent. However, inoculations have slowed and the country has ample vaccine stock of about 25 million doses. There is a risk that just over 100,000 or so doses, which will expire by end of March. It will be a sad day if significant volumes of doses can end up being discarded. We hope it will not reach that stage, Health Minister Joe Phahala told an online news conference. He said the department was trying to ramp up inoculations to save the vaccine doses from being discarded. South Africa has so far fully vaccinated around 43% of its 40 million adults. South Africa's vaccination campaign using the Johnson & Johnson and Pfizer vaccines got off to a slow start due to difficulty securing early supplies, but more recently, it has been dodged by hesitancy. Last month, the country changed its COVID-19 vaccination rule in an effort to encourage more people to get jabs. Now, in our next story, Tripoli tense amid standoff between Libya's two rival governments. Now, a long ceasefire has brought life back to Tripoli's Algeria Square. Its roundabout replanted with grass and customers lingering into the night at the Aurora Cafe. But Libya's new crisis of two governments threatens to upend that peace. Now, the standoff worsened this week as the parliamentarian in the east swore in a new administration, while the incumbent in Tripoli refused to cede power. Now, the increased number of security vehicles racing through the capital streets are a sign of a crisis that could trigger fighting if no deal can be reached. Now, a scheduled election in December was stopped amid factional disputes over the rules. Now, on Thursday, the parliament in Tobruk in eastern Libya appointed a new government despite the present administration in Tripoli refusing to cede power. Now, the incumbent Prime Minister Abdul Hamid Abiba, installed a year ago in a UN-backed process, has denounced the parliament's appointment of Fatih Bashaha to replace him and says he will only quit after a rescheduled election. However, both men appear to believe they can count on support among the myriad armed factions whose gunmen will true control over the streets of Tripoli. An expected move by Bashar to enter the capital may trigger fighting. Now, do stay with us for international news right after the break.
Have you received a loan from NSFAF? NSFAF loan is the same as any other loan. It must be paid and settled. NSFAF has a set of guidelines on how you can repay your loan and become debt-free. Therefore, it is important that you, a former beneficiary and a responsible Namibian, show your patriotism by helping pay back your loan and thus helping NSFAF become a revolving fund for the benefit of future potential students. By failing to pay back your NSFAF loan, you risk being blacklisted or having a court order against you. So arrange with the fund to pay back your loan today. For more information on how you can repay your loan, visit our website at www.nasfaf.na or visit our Facebook page or Twitter. Do the right thing and hashtag payback the money.
Welcome back to NMH at 1. Now let's take a look at our international news stories. Now Ukraine decries immoral stunt after Moscow says it will let civilians flee to Russia. Now, Russia announced new humanitarian corridors on Monday to transport Ukrainians trapped under its bombardment to Russia itself, its ally, Belarus, a move immediately dismissed by Kyiv as an immoral stunt. Now, the announcement came after 2 days of failed ceasefire to let civilians escape the besieged city of Mariupol, where hundreds of thousands of people are trapped without food and water, under relentless bombardment and unable to evacuate their wounded. Now, the new corridors would be opened at 10 a.m. Moscow time from the capital Kyiv and the eastern cities of Kharkiv and Sumy, as well as Mariupol, Russia's defense ministry said. Now, according to maps published by the RIA News agency, the corridor from Kyiv would lead to Belarus, while civilians from Kharkiv would be permitted to go only to Russia. Now, Russia would also mount an airlift to take Ukrainians from Kyiv to Russia, the ministry said. A spokesperson from the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky called the move completely immoral and said Russia was trying to use people suffering to create a television picture. They are citizens of Ukraine. They should have the right to evacuate to the territory of Ukraine, the spokesperson told Reuters. Now, in our next story, scramble for transport as Yemen fuel shortage worsens. Now, Yemenis are riding on the roof of hanging out the sides of taxi vans as severe fuel shortages in the capital Sana'a and other Houthi-held areas raise demands for public transportation, with people queuing for days to fill the tanks of their cars. Now, university students Ahmad Al-Mari and Ahmed Al-Mutara complain the fuel crunch is further disrupting their education in the war-torn Arabian Peninsula. Now, people also struggle to reach markets and health centers. 20 liters of petrol at fuel station cost an equivalent of $16 and more than 4 times that on the parallel market. Now, around 80% of Yemen's population needs assistance because of its economic collapse in the 7-year war and the sea and air blockade by the Saudi-led coalition on areas held by the Houthis. Now, air and sea access to Yemen is controlled by the coalition that intervened in Yemen in the early 2015 after the Iran-aligned Houthis ousted the government from Sana'a. Now, the alliance says the restrictions are needed to prevent the smuggling and access to the Houthis of using ports for military purposes, charges, and the group denies. Now, we're going to go for a quick ad break before we continue with our stories. Thank you for staying with NMH at 1. Now let's take a look at our local sports news. Now, Erasmus saves Eagles with 1-2-1 not out. Now, a true captain's knock by Gerhard Erasmus propelled his Namibia Eagles side to a vital win against Oman in their first match of the ICC World Cup League 2 series in Dubai yesterday, coming into bat with his side in desperate troubles at 43/6 and 53/7. Erasmus made a brilliant 1-2-1 not out of 120 balls to help Namibia set up 226 all out. This total proved more than enough as the disciplined bowling attack limited Oman to 116 all out for a 110-run win. For the Eagles, Namibia will play the UAE tomorrow. Now in our next story, Old Boys on top once again. Sealing Center WHS Old Boys won at the weekend won the one-day Premier League final in Pioneers Park with 142 runs versus Samsung Wanderers, won in an exciting encounter to keep the cup for the third year in a row. A fierce and feisty Old Boys team of 322 runs, 7 wickets in 50 overs on Saturday bullied a helpless Wanderers side 180/10 in 4.3, with finest Old Boys lost the toss and was sent in by the guests to bat first. Now, barely nothing went wrong for the captain, JB Kotse, and his fellow batsmen, finding the sweet spot of their willows, amassing a massive 322 runs for the loss of 7 wickets in 50 overs. Now in our next story, Oshinene Athletics Club aims for the stars. Established in January 2022 and with already 2 Athletic Namibian Grand Prix appearances to its name, Oshinene Athletics Club has eyes set on changing the fortunes of many upcoming and current athletes from the settlement and Omaheke region at large. Now, Oshinene Athletics Club has embarked on a journey to make sure that talent in the rural settlement and the region does not go to waste. Many young talent in the settlement have often witnessed their promising careers cut short after failing at school. This means that they were only able to compete at school level with no other alternative in the settlement. Now moving on to international sports news, FIFA bans players over a bandit match. More after the break. Welcome back to NMH at 1. Now let's take a look at our international sports news. Now, Baxter pinpoints Chiefs match winning moment. Now, Kaiser Chiefs coach Stuart Baxter has pinpointed a match winning moment in his side's triumph over Orlando Pirates during the weekend's Soweto Derby. Now, Kaiser Chiefs completed the double over bitter rivals Orlando Pirates on Saturday when the Amakosi ran out 2-1 winners of the Buccaneers at the Orlando Stadium. Now, Reeve Frosler and Eric Matotho scored either side of a goal from Pirates' Kwame Pepra, but it was a late save from the goalkeeper, Brendan Peterson, to deny Terence Javakumunja that ultimately ensured that the Amakosi went home with all 3 points. Now, Man United slammed for embarrassing loss. Manchester United stars have been accused of throwing in the towel by their former player, Gary Neville, during their 4-1 defeat to Manchester City on Sunday evening. Now, the Red Devils suffered a massive blow in their bid to finish in the top 4 as Pep Guardiola's side secured an emphatic win over them at the Etihad Stadium. Now, Kevin De Bruyne and Riyad Mahrez both scored twice in the Manchester Derby, with Jordan Sancho also finding the back of the net against his boyhood club. Now, in our next story, New Zealand beat Bangladesh. Now, host New Zealand got their first win of the Women's World Cup with a 9-wicket victory over Bangladesh. After losing their opener to West Indies, the White Ferns were in danger of further frustration when rain delayed the start in Dundee. Now, however, in a match reduced to 27 overs per side, World Cup debutants Bangladesh were restricted to 140-8. New Zealand raced to their target in 20 overs through the Susie Butts 79 not out and unbeaten 49 from Amelie Kerr. We'll return with the highlights after this break. Welcome back to NMH at 1. Here are your news highlights. Now, a robbery with aggravating circumstances was reported around 3:30 a.m. in Ludwigsdorf on Sunday. It was reported that 3 suspects armed with pistols removed 2 precast from the boundary wall to gain entry to the premise. Now, the intruders held 4 Chinese nationals at gunpoint and took items at the value at 73,299 Namibian dollars. Now, the United Nations peacekeeping mission in Mali said on Friday it was investigating allegations that dozens of people were massacred in the center of the country. Russia announced new humanitarian corridors on to transport Ukrainians trapped under its bombardment to Russia itself and its ally, Belarus, a move immediately dismissed by Kyiv as an immoral stunt. Now, the new corridors would be opened at 10 a.m. Moscow time for the capital, Kyiv, and the eastern cities of Kharkiv and Sumy, as well as Mariupol, Russia's defense ministry said. A true captain's knock by Gerhard Erasmus propelled his Namibia Eagles side to a vital win against Oman in their first match of the ICC World Cup League 2 series in Dubai yesterday. Now, coming into bed with his side in desperate trouble, Erasmus made a brilliant 1-1 not out of 120 balls to help Namibia set up 222 all out. Now, Kaizer Chiefs coach Stuart Baxter has pinpointed a match-winning moment in his side's triumph over Orlando's Pirates during the weekend's Soweto Derby. Now, if legal steps taken by Trustco Group Holdings don't succeed, the JSE will suspend the listing of its shares on 11 March 2022. Should the JSE suspend the listing of Trustco Group Holdings shares on the South African Stock Exchange, the Namibian-based company will suffer incalculable damage, which will likely devastate Trustco entirely and irreparably. Now, those have been your highlights. Thank you for staying with NMH at 1, your lunchtime companion. Remember to tune in tomorrow at 1 p.m. as we take you through the latest happenings in Namibia and beyond. But until then, here's a compilation of news from across the regions. I have been your host, Glenna Rashipura.
Good day, viewers. Welcome to another episode of Regional Review. My name is Tunole Mongoba, and I will be your host for today's episode. Please stay tuned and see what we have in store for you today, all the way from the northern regions of Namibia. Before we get into the news of today it is Plant Power Day. There is a lot of noise about vegetarianism and veganism these days, and while there is much goodness that's coming out of this movement, it can be tricky to fully eliminate certain food groups from your diet. Plant Power Day is the perfect solution for those trying to include more foliage in their meals and move towards a more plant-rich diet, as this day is all about prioritizing plant-based food. Watch more as NMH prepared a short video to celebrate Plant Power Day. For our first story, police in the northern regions of Namibia has reinforced its commitment to fight crime with the return of the chopper. The chopper has been out of service for over a year, and the chopper will be able to assist the police in the Omusati, Ohangwena, Oshana, and Oshikoto region to help fight crime from the air. Oshana police spokesperson Inspector Thomas Iyambo also informed the public that the police has also acquired a K9 sniffing dog to assist the region to fight drugs in the region. The dog will be used in the community and also using to patrol roadblocks. Tunole Mongoba brings you this story.
Yeah, when we have full tank is a problem. Now we are full heavy. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, it's in place, everything is ready. You also have your K9. What is your message to would-be criminals in the four northern regions?
Yeah, my message to the criminals is that it's good. They have to get away of the mind of committing any type of crime here, because now we are reinforced. If I'm talking about the shopper, wherever you are going to hide, either in the bush or you are trying to run away with a vehicle, the shopper is having a speed. I don't think you will be managed to go so far. We will get you immediately before you reach your destination. So it's better you stop any type of criminal you are thinking of doing, because we will not have time to waste, but we will only have time to get you and then bring you to book.
Inspector,
Yes.
just one more question. So now that the chopper is for all of the northern regions, where is it going to be situated? Where is it going to be parked? Where is it going to stay 24/7? Here
Yes.
at this airstrip.
Yeah, as you can see here, the shopper is here. It's based here in Oshana, Oshakati airstrip. So the offices, they are here. As you can see, there's a hangar where it's used to park, accommodation for the pilots and stuff. So it will departure from here. As I said, it is very fast. We are talking about 90 kilometers to Tapi, but it will take about 20 minutes. It's already there, and then it will assist on the other side.